Okay, so we're rolling, and we all going to be a little bit more careful about what we say today now when it's all being taped. Except for Marco. Marco doesn't care. I mean, if he's recorded, right? Am I wrong, Marco? Oh, you put yourself on mute immediately.
Yeah, so I have to stand by my words. So whatever I say, I have to own.
Yeah, I noticed. I thought that you went on mute as soon as I started.
No.
Anyway, so I'll start with this. Let me know when you see the screen. This is okay. Good. This is just sort of a little bit broader map that shows how a utility might go about doing these assessments and then doing work activities and things like that. And just to very briefly recap for those who may have not seen this before, you would kind of start with preliminary planning and then select the business process and identify the stakeholders. So once the stakeholders are identified, they could actually have what they need if they're going to conduct a people, workforce, organizational culture assessment for that specific process. And then we have from that other projects that I mentioned, WRF 5039, these two things: assessing the characteristics of the business process and the technology aspect. And this really helps us understand how big is this process, how complicated, how many people are involved, and what kind of data we are collecting and all that. But as we go and we document the process, analyze, design the to-be process, as we're building the required improvements, that's where we feel that where asset change management to assess change management activity would come into play. So this is a whole spreadsheet that has navigation for the people, for the process components, and for technology. And I don't want to spend too much time. I will share where this is so you can look at it. But what we thought we would do today is to look at a similar first cut at the tool that we would use for change management. And Deborah, that stakeholder thing is in the other, give me just a second. That stakeholder, identify stakeholders is here. And when we can meet, I'd begin to see your template. What I have right now is basically who the stakeholder is, whether they're affiliated, what unit, team, group, whatever organization, and what that unit name is called, whether it's engineering, operations, IT, whatever the heck it is. So we can improve that based on, discussion with you. So when it comes to change management, by that time, we would have done assessments on the people side, on the technology side. So what this first cut shows is these categories that we've looked at, change management capabilities and maturity that we started from, and we collected some comments. So the way it looks like is the tool right now, and we can certainly change this. There are these 5 aspects, and so there's a statement, and I just provided statements, answers across the board, so that I have from 1 to 5, I have all of them. So that's just for testing purposes. So then there's the next one is communication. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Where there are questions, and I provided some answers. The change process, and we can come back and discuss any of these change process. Then there is employee skills and capacity. Let me just make this a little bigger. Is this big enough for your screens? Can you see it? Is anybody unable to see the screen? I should have asked this earlier, but
we see it. It's just like one step above Braille, but
okay.
we can see it.
Okay. Okay. So how about this? Is this better?
I can put away my white cane. Yeah, that's
okay. Okay. So this is these questions you're all familiar with. We've discussed them, and these answers are from don't know to strongly disagree, disagree, agree, and strongly agree. So that's true across the board. And then the last category is executing change. We'll zoom into that one a little bit. So if we want to make changes, we can do that. Right now, what we come up with when somebody enters the results, it comes out with this kind of summary that you can look at what the statements and what the answers were. So that can be kind of discussed and debated and this would be providing a basis for developing a change management plan. And
is this a summary of those, or will these be all individual responses? Will this be collapsed into one document as a summary?
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. When it came in the people assessment tool, it was meant to be a survey that would go to individuals. What we were envisioning for the change management, that these things would not be a survey that individuals would answer, but this would be a template to be discussed in a workshop. The one for the workforce and organizational culture is a lot more about how people feel about things. This is and for example, on the technology and process, it's really not at all about feelings. It's really about what is actually going on. Change management is a little bit of a gray area. If people feel that we need to have anonymity or confidentiality, we can adjust and use a different approach. But so the way it is right now was the idea that these things would be discussed in meetings and kind of jointly assign these codes.
So Marco, for us, one of the ways we may apply this is because we want to possibly have our cake and eat it, right? We want to do this in a group setting where we can discuss truly what it means to strongly agree. Because I think we all have a different perspective on what strongly agree or agree means. So we can say,
I'm sorry, Ramona, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So we can talk about that. And I think the eating the cake is after we've discussed it for the individuals to then provide their input and it all be rolled up into one document.
Well, you know what makes me feel like the happy dance with this is because you're talking about discussing it in groups. So, you know, we have a captive audience of groups now.
Yes.
In our equity change groups. So thank you. Whose idea was this?
Well, I'll point to Scott just because I don't, I'm afraid to point to anybody else.
I'm just screaming kudos is what I'm. This is,
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, we discussed this between Scott and Ramona and myself and some other folks when, it was not. But thank you for the kudos. It goes to a number of people.
The humility is it's nice, but you listen. This is a winner. Take it. Own it.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
one thing I would just add is that assuming you do it in a workshop setting, it assumes that you come to some form of consensus around, like Ramona was talking about, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And then you notice that these are color coded. And if this is a readiness to make the change that has been proposed, and so if you could see all the strongly disagree and disagree things, like you're not really ready, like on the first one in the upper left, leadership and vision. There's a common vision and compelling rationale for the change. Well, if people disagree that you even have a rationale and a common vision for the change, then maybe you need to communicate and work on that a little bit, right? So the things that are in pink and red and tend to be the things that don't score as well. And of course, this is just a sample version, but you can kind of look at those things that are scoring low, and you may not be ready to do the change if you're scoring low in something, and you may need to work on that particular area.
Deborah has her hand up, and then Marco.
Yeah, only thing that I would recommend or suggest is that you put these in numerical order to make it easy for people to get into a rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because this having the number underneath it kind of bouncing around, that threw me off. So like in the ones I've done in the past, disagree would be a 0 or a 1, or strongly disagree would be a 0 or 1, and that would be first, and then disagree, and it would go in order so that it wouldn't be the number system would be consistent.
So
Cello, you do have a legend, right?
yeah, we have a legend, and I think in most cases I would agree with that. However, some of the questions, and I tend, from doing these, people see strongly agree, agree, and disagree, and they kind of pick somewhere in the middle. This way, it forces you to see, okay, well, what is the question? Because I think they don't look at what's the question really asking you. Is a positive response really of strongly agree really going to get you a positive result on the score, or is it really a negative result on the score? So I think part of the discomfort of having to really read this, and it's kind of, it forces that discussion. Because if you look at it, Cello, if you go back to that last slide you had, where so it forces you to say, okay, all the reds are really bad, but where do they really fall on the scale? Of, is it a positive thing or a negative thing? Does that make sense, or did I kind of?
Yeah,
it's okay.
let me, Deborah, the one thing, instead of going to all responses where I meant to go, I went to dashboard, which is my working page. And the reason that I assigned numbers, and that was actually going to be hidden, is because I wanted to see if any of them are 0, which means that the question hasn't been answered. In which case I would not compute the overall score, but would say, it's incomplete. So this is a working page that, how should I say, that where you see the stuff that would kind of be in the background. And to Ramona's point, this is the design page. And the idea is that if you wanted to change a question, you would only change it in one place. And you would change it here, and then it would propagate. If you wanted to change the scale for the answers, you would, if you could change it here. I don't think changing things like questions or answer scale would complicate things, that it would make it eventually more difficult to compare between what different utilities are doing. And it would be difficult to say, well, across the board, this is what we've seen in, 8 or 10 utilities, if everybody used a different scale. And I actually was not sure, and all this is up for debate. When I had the colors, and I should color that to make it. I was, for example, if they said don't know, I thought, okay, well, how do I indicate that color? Do I, because if you don't know, it's not like it's bad, but it's something you should, if you don't know what to say about leadership and vision, it is a little bit of a flag. And the next step to say, okay, what kind of things would be actions that you could consider here is that you would then look at these things, and there's 5 of them, and try to construct and say, well, if you strongly disagree that there's evidence and actions that show maybe communication needs to be executive responses. I mean, it would give you a.
I understand all that. I'm just saying that I've built a lot of surveys and done assessments. When you start moving things around and it's not consistent, it frustrates the person who's doing the assessment more than what I think you're trying to do is force them to think, right? And to read each box independently and make a more intelligent decisions before they select one. But I think sometimes it has the opposite effect because it's not in the same structure. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so we can have, I'm sorry, Scott, we can have a discussion to see how best this would work, because this is just showing this is just kind of showing what the results would look like. And this is a version, 0.5. And the reason, and we can have at the next meeting, perhaps, we can have a discussion about how and between now and the next meetings, you can, there'll be a link to this, and you can say, okay, these are the changes that I would suggest. Sorry, Scott, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, and we want to get to Marco, and we can dive in too deep. But actually, Deborah, at Great Lakes, when we did a similar kind of thing, we actually had a workshop and we passed out cards, and everybody had cards, in effect 1 through 5, and 1 represented, that particular legend. And you say, and you read off the question, there's a common vision and compelling rationale for this change, and then people put up their cards. And then you can see, is there a consensus, or are we close? And then you can have a discussion. Well, why would you say that you agreed with the statement when everybody else is saying you disagree? And so that's back to Cello's comment that next time we can talk about how you might go about this in a workshop type of setting. But your point is pretty valid, because there are techniques you can use that are going to allow individuals to say what they think and how they're feeling about it, as Cello said. But then it's gonna, if everyone is a red, or a 5, then you don't really have to discuss it too much. It's already there. And then you can kind of go through all that. And that's just one method. But there are different ways to do it. Like Ramona says, you want to have discussion around, why are people thinking differently about each one of these questions.
Marco?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. You're right on to where I think I was headed, and I don't have a real strong opinion about some of the technical stuff here as to what might work best. However, my comment is an and, not a but. As you have kind of started in on, Scott, around, this is me again from the equity place, right, in terms of how we kind of view the responses, and we will actually do ourselves a disservice if we begin to assign value to what these responses are, if it's a disagree or a strongly agree. So from the equity place, I might actually feel very compelled to lean in to a response that is singular. So that if in fact there's that one individual who is the outlier, because we have created this open and safe and relational environment where we really get transparency and we get open and honest feelings, it may be more important for us to lean into that singular space
Yep.
to find out what that piece is that someone may strongly agree. Because agreeing or disagreeing may, based on what the question is, which Ramona kind of spoke to, agreeing may be a positive and agreement may be a negative, you know,
Sure.
for whatever that question might be. But so to the equity piece, every response from every place is important, whether it is a majority response or one that does stand on the margins, because that marginal place might be the place where we have to do the most work. So
Yeah, and Marco, if everybody says strongly agree and one person says disagree, it is what it is, right?
yeah,
And
right.
that may mean that in general, people are agreeing, but we need to work on the education or knowledge or whatever for that person and respect what they're saying, is what you're saying. So,
And we want to know from where it comes. So if the disagreement is there, what is informing that for that person? So from the equity place again, we are meeting folk where their need is, so that we understand, and maybe it will never change. The disagreement may never change, but at least we are aware of it, we are informed of it, and then we know what we need to do. Again, from the equity place, and I probably have talked about this again, it is so easy for us to agree with what we have in common and what we share and what we like alike, because we all like, you know, that whatever that thing is, you know, that everybody really loves the, you know, the sweet potato fries. But
Oh,
what
yeah.
when we don't like them? And so what does it mean for that person who doesn't like them? And how do we embrace that? And how do we find the thing that works for that person, that enables them to be just as productive and just as effective, and they don't ever have to have the sweet potato fries?
and Marco, if we have a range of stakeholders and they come from different places and they're all together, then it's going to tell you perhaps that the perceptions that people have, you know, let's just say in your main office or certain, you know, different demographics may feel differently about that question, right?
I have an idea.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead, Deborah. Go ahead, Deborah.
I wanted to have, you know, Jessica chime in just a little bit because, and I'm not trying to beat this subject down to the nth degree, but I think we would like to maybe reword everything to where it's a little more structure and order, because I think you'll get more people having, looking at it as a system and seeing what the structure is, understand that first, and then going to answer the questions. If it's more subjective and less subjective and less objective, it's going to be hard to fit a square peg in a round hole around the whole, you know, all the different utilities, right? And so that's what the structure will do, is so that, yeah, we're all different, but we got to build a structure that will be very consistent to give us a better idea of where the need and the help is necessary. But if it's too subjective, you'll find yourself in a bunch of loops, and it's hard to really gain a great understanding of what's happening in these utilities. Jessica, did I say that right? Or did I not say what you were saying right?
Yeah, I was thinking that to make this this open to the conversation, that we need to see what is every comment that is for the reference of strongly agree. What is the point of that comment? It's leaning on what, on the personal side, on the information side, on the implementation side. What is the intention of the comment? Where it going to take us?
Okay, these are the things. These are the things that we can change. If we go to the design tab, we can change these statements. That's one thing we can change if you want to. They've been out there for a while. They've been, you know, we've invited people to make comments and we've implemented the comments that they've done. But the other thing is, consider this, and this may not be a bad thing to try next time. The way this can be done in a structure, and I'll let Ramona speak in a second, is each one of these can be a Mentimeter question. So you have technology that you can use in a room that, and you don't know who's voting how. You put up this question. There's a common vision and compelling rationale for the change, and people are on their phones, and they can immediately, it's equivalent to having these cards, and they can see, and you can immediately see on the thing graph that you have 8 people disagreeing, 2 people agreeing, and it gives you, provides you a context for discussion. And so that's how technology can help us. And I'm not against improving these questions at all, but when you say structure, Deborah, do you mean the tool that we're using? Do you mean this, the categories are not correct? What would you think that we could change?
Or the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
The structure would be, for example, a strongly disagree needs to be, and just work with me for a minute when I use this next word, because I don't want anybody to pounce on me, but let's just say, for example, strongly disagree. We want that to be worded such that it's always a negative impact or negative view or negative, so that over time people will get consistently to understand that when I select strongly disagree, I'm not happy with it, I don't agree with it, I'm not trying to implement that. So then that becomes a structure, and it's something that people can get accustomed to, so when they're answering the questions, they always know that that red box or that red and white box or that strongly disagree means that I don't like it in my organization. And that way we can start understanding data and have a system to follow, that negative is always something that people don't want. If we start making the negative sometimes a positive, then that's where the confusion can take place. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying change it 1,000%, but make strongly disagree always a disagree, and whatever number structure you want to give it, a 5 or a 0 is fine, but just that understanding of what a strongly disagree is, make it consistent so it will not cause confusion and it will be more of a system.
So let me just say, what I think you're saying is that each statement has to be in a positive, in the same direction, either positive or negative. Do you see any negative statements here? Sorry, am I?
Yeah, because I think that they're all positive statements.
All of the statements are positive.
Right.
Okay.
But
so all of the statements are positive. So if they disagree with these, we would think that there's a problem.
And Jessica's question, I think, was really good. Is like, what's the point of it? And really, let's just say if it's strongly disagree with this positive statement, then the idea is what are you going to do about it? You know, so that you're saying, so that you could have a discussion. Well, what actions should we take to get, to bring ourselves to a comfort level in this regard before we implement a change? That's really what it gets to.
Correct. So like when I first did the survey for the FSA, which is our financial service area, we wanted to be able to get the voice of the people to understand where did the financial team need to focus to do the most improvements or make the most changes or whatever.
Yes.
So it was hard. It was a heart-wrenching process, but I made sure that whenever strongly disagree was listed as an option, it meant the same. So when it was time for us to analyze the data and put solutions and recommendations to what we received as answers, it was a lot more consistent. So when people saw the graphs and they saw, okay, we had 40% people said strongly disagree, it clicked in everybody's mind that that was something that needed to be worked on. If I'm making myself clear, I hope I am. But and then that way, when we did the survey the next year, now I had something to compare it to, because we didn't change the definitions. We may have changed slightly some of the questions or added questions, but strongly disagree still meant the same. So now we could compare to see how much progress or improvement we made year over year. And so we did that for the 3 or 4 years consistently, but it helped us see as a baseline that strongly disagree meant this, strongly agree meant that. And that way, when we went from year to year, we could see where we actually made improvements and grew in terms of how we were functioning and processing materials and information.
So let's just imagine that the change that we've gone through a business process review for handling of chlorine tanks. And we've identified some improvements that need to be made there. This change readiness is, are we really ready to make the changes that were proposed, from a safety standpoint or whatever, with the way that we manage the chlorine tanks? And so if we say strongly disagree that we're on a particular question, stakeholders understand what this change means to them, and strongly disagree, well, then maybe there's an action, maybe not to check in later, but actually to work on now to make sure that stakeholders understand what the change means to them and make sure we're comfortable. So dealing with all the strongly disagrees is important. Or like Marco said, let's say only one person, says, I strongly disagree. Well, then maybe the action is go do some knowledge transfer or engagement with that particular person, could be what the action is. But, it's not necessarily about change in the organization overall necessarily, but it's on a specific change that's been proposed because of a business process improvement that's being undertaken.
Well, we can have our attempt was, whether it's successful or not, to make every one of these statements positive and something that would be desirable and advantageous for change management. If you see some that are wrong or not positive, we'll definitely need to change them, and that would make it consistent. So right now, for the next couple of weeks until we meet again, I will give you the link to this file. So this is, again, open for discussion. And if we go to this design tab, currently it's locked. I just want to make sure if it would be safer. Okay, I have dual conflicting thoughts and wishes. It would be easier if everybody worked in the same file and saw what the other people are changing. But if Ramona thinks, change the cell to one thing and Deborah wants to change it to another thing, it would get lost because you would only get to whoever was there last. So what may be good between now and next week, if I give you a link, you could just download a copy locally and provide comments in your own spreadsheet. And if you have notes, I can even have a page where you can say, I made, this is where I made, so I can figure out who made changes to what. And what may not be a bad idea to actually simulate one of these things to next time and say, let's pretend we're in such and such workshop. And I can, Ramona, I think wants to have a word.
Yeah, I think so. Change management is not easy. It is not comfortable. It is not meant to be comfortable. Change is difficult. And I think in working through this, being able to do this in a group setting, I think rather than, so for me, what tends to happen, and I notice this a lot, is strongly agree means that it's a positive statement, and I'm playing along and I'm choosing strongly agree because it's going to be good for everybody. But in my heart of hearts, I don't necessarily really believe that, but I get used to clicking that far left or far right because that's where I think I should be. I think part of what we have to do is force people to have a conversation about what it really means. And we have to get our folks invested in understanding that it's okay to be the only person on the far left or far right if it's not the thing that's desirable to everybody else. Because sometimes, for instance, if I were to do this in our leadership group, there are probably about 5 people that I can point out that will always agree with everything because they're going to be looking towards the director to see what direction he feels to kind of mimic that. So part of me, I agree with Deborah in figuring out how we can do it in a way that we can always replicate it and get some good data from it. But part of me knows from all of the years doing GECAC, a big part of making change management successful is living in the discomfort. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to live in that discomfort and make those rooms a little bit uncomfortable where folks have to go, okay, I kind of have to sit up straight. I got to think about this. What do I really want? What does it mean? How do I get there? Do I even want to get there? So I want to make sure that we don't take too much of that edge off, that we do keep some of that discomfort so that we keep alive and engaged and not just clicking off a set of buttons because it's another task that we have to do.
Ramona, that's a great comment. And, keeping in mind that what we're talking about is this group of stakeholders ready to implement and be part of a specific change that's been identified. And if they're not ready in all these respects, then those may be things to deal with, or at least to acknowledge, like you're saying, that we have some issues there. But I think the value here is that we are talking about a specific improvement. I mean, are all your, chlorine tank participants, are they on board? And because basically what we've learned is that only 30% of initiatives are successful, and engagement is real important. And if people aren't engaged and part of the solution and bought in and everything, then it's not going to work. They're going to resort to their old habits and really not do the change. So I think you're right. It should be intended to get the issues out there and make sure that you deal with them.
Yeah.
Okay, I put this in the wrong place. Sorry. This may help. I just added an arrow here. The way it's envisioned is that when you do asset change management, when you assess the change management maturity, in addition to having this survey that we've been talking about, you would also have the result of the workforce and organizational culture survey, which was confidential. So we may not need, and as you know, that has a number of questions. So we may not need to answer all the questions regarding comfort and discomfort and things like that. So that people assessment will give us confidential answers on a lot of things that may help us put the change management tool into context. Just a thought. So
Are there thoughts that others, I mean, we have a number of others on the phone, and we could start calling names, but it's better if you volunteer. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to contribute? Is this making sense to you? Is this looking like it's on track? More to do as a team here, but but is it headed in the right direction?
Hey, Scott, it appears that it's on track to me. It does make sense, and I do not have anything other than that I would like to add. Thank you for asking.
Any other thoughts?
I didn't
We
put
hate
him
to-
up to that.
Who said that?
Marco.
Oh, Mark.
Of
I think
course.
Scott knows me better than that.
So what I would propose is this. Let's, to keep things moving, if you can think about this, if you'd like to have one-on-one, meaning not just, it can be as many from your utility, as you'd like, to get in individual conversations. You can go to that design, the design tab that I'm showing right now and make suggestions. We can send out the link to the spreadsheet after this, and try to sort out how we can improve this.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing too, Cello, is it's not just about these questions and these positive statements. It's more, how do we use it? And if people have comments about how suggestions about how it's to be used, or some things that you want to discuss more, that's great. If you want to make changes in the statements, that's great too. There have been a couple opportunities that people have had to do that, but time is always a problem. We know that. But, for next time, we want to kind of advance the conversation. And so, I think that the question of, okay, how do we apply this? What are some general kinds of guidelines? How is it going to be used? Those are some of the things that you all have been talking about too.
Deborah.
And one more thing, just from experience, when we did swap, what the meaning was, I remember Nikki Bateson, our financial chief of finance, it would always confuse her when we got to those two questions. And that was something we learned that first year, not to switch the meaning of some of these qualifiers or definitions of what have you, because every time we got to that slide to show her how we analyzed the findings, it took her a minute to remember that these two questions were not the same format. And so I just want to caution you there that once people get accustomed to a meaning for all the various other questions, and then you might switch something so you can't have that discomfort, it may confuse them later. And we found that until we finally had to change the survey and maybe make a new baseline so that everything was consistent in terms of definition and meaning. So when we analyzed it, it didn't cause people to be like, well, wait a minute, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? So I just want to throw that caution out, because we did experience that, and it caused a lot of heartburn when it was time to analyze, to apply it to a solution.
Okay, so we have 5 categories, and each of them has 5 questions. So there's 25 statements. To the best of my knowledge, they're all positive. They all go in the same direction.
Same direction, yes.
If there is one of them, if you can point to examples where that's not the case, we'll obviously fix it. Otherwise, I think we're in a violent agreement.
Yeah.
Nobody's contesting what you're saying. That totally makes sense. But if there is some place where we overlooked or failed to follow that, that'd be great to know.
I got a quick question from Marco and Phil. What are your thoughts on us using this for 2 groups at Baltimore City for Operation Sunrise?
Which groups?
Huh?
Which groups?
So maybe we do it for mid-management and boots on the ground. We know what leadership thoughts are. So maybe we do it mid-level management and boots on the ground, but for Operation Sunrise.
Well, let's talk offline so I can get, in the weeds
Okay.
with you about it so that we carefully place it because, you already know my default answer. So
Yeah.
let's just figure out how that,
Yeah, because
what that
way
looks like.
actually test it on something that it's a project that we're working on for the entire department. And it would be interesting to see, we need to get some feedback from different groups. And I think this would be a great way to see how this operates in a group environment to get some feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm open. I'm open for it. We'll just need to find out which ones we think work best.
Right.
That'll turn it around for us.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
so much happening, let's just figure out which one we get
Yeah.
get it through quickly. Yeah.
Roxy Patterson has a hand up.
Good morning. I did. I had a question similar to what Ramona was just mentioning. I was wondering, what groups can you choose your groups, or which groups would be good to use this with? And the other thought I had was, do you have to use each category? Because there may be times where I may just want to use change management and get feedback from that particular area. So can you pick and choose which ones you want to use, or is it designed to use it in a whole, if that makes sense?
You could choose to use any part of it that you like. The reason, what our thought was, when you said who would you use it on, is that what we had thought is that you could either use it on a specific business unit, but if it's change management, it would be good if people know what kind of change you're talking about. Does it mean that everybody's gonna have to grow a mustache? What are we talking about here? So what we have thought is that to put it in the context of improving either business processes or applying technology or making some changes of how people do the work. So because if we ask people, are you comfortable with change in general, without telling them, okay, this is the change we're talking about, nobody's comfortable with change. I mean, I'm certainly not comfortable with change. I mean, I used to have hair, it was all good. And look at me now, so of course I don't like the change. But if we put it in a frame and so that people, oh, okay, that's what you mean, because change often means loss, you see? And if people perceive a possibility of loss, of course it's difficult. So that's why we thought if you can identify what exactly you want to change, it will help people say, oh, this is fine with me, or heck no.
And also, just to add, you mentioned this earlier, Cello, but if you were doing the workforce and organizational culture survey, and you had areas of improvement that were identified there, and you wanted to change those things, then this could be used, around whether you're ready to implement that change, or your operation, whatever it was, Ramona, if you're doing that, we're as a utility or as a unit or whatever, we're going to be making such and such a change, then this could be used to basically say, are we ready to do that?
And just to add a feedback, because I know you all were asking for that, I do think the statement Ramona made was right on point, that change is uncomfortable. And those are I guess I sit and listen because you guys are very good experts and provide good information. But the change is very challenging, and it is very hard for me sometimes in my utility to really get it across. And I guess I sometimes look at it that it's hard to where I don't know if it'll ever get accepted. So just really understanding that part of it and being a little bit open to that. So that, because people don't like change, as you said, Chelo, and it is hard to really get people to buy in on the change, even though it could be very, very good for them. So
Yep.
that's why I asked so many questions. I'm really doing a lot of learning too, because there are things in my utility that we're moving towards. So I just want to be able to try to help the folks here as best I can. So thank you all for the feedback.
Thank you. And Marco and then Vince.
Yeah, so my response is to Roxy, and I think that, again, the answer is yes around what you're asking. So I would think that, like Ramona has asked, how we might use this right now at this stage so that we can get feedback on it. But again, from an equity place, Roxy, this should be usable, applicable, and transferable at every level, because change in some place, in any place, is going to impact another place. So whether we do implement this tool at the same time at every place, but if you know the place where you can enable this, or at least get the kind of cooperation and participation, identify that and use it there, start there, work with where you can work. And the whole idea about change, I hear folks say that people don't like change. As a musician also, one of the things that I was taught about what people really don't know what they like what they know. So when you're not exposed to experiences, then you tend to not like them. And so what's happening in a culture, we're in cultures, whether we're in our home, whether we're in our neighborhood, whether we're in our congregation, whether we're in our workspace, all of them have cultures. There are cultures in restaurants, there are cultures in clubs. Our workplace is a culture. And so shifting cultures is not something we do overnight. We do it. Don't ever move the piano from the far left side to the right side. Don't ever do that. But if you start moving the piano 1 inch every week on the right side, and you need to get it to the left side, they won't even know the piano is moving if you keep playing it well and moving it. And before you know it, it's all the way where you needed to go, and nobody will have remembered it because they've been enjoying the music and they've been going along on the ride. So cultures can change, but they don't happen overnight. But if you do nothing, that's exactly what you'll get. You'll get the same thing. So do something, even if it's wrong, and then you'll find out that it's not working. But do something.
Okay, Marco, first of all, I'm going to steal that line, just so you know. I will make attribution to you, just so you know, because I really like it that when you said that people don't know what they like what they know. So thank you for that. And
Absolutely.
Vince has his hand. Vince, Vince, and
Yes,
then
yes.
Ashley. Vince and Ashley, yeah.
Thank you, and I appreciate being part of this. And I'm learning every time we have a meeting, more and more what's trying to be accomplished here. And I thank everyone for their hard work. My question is that if you're using this, and Ramona had made a suggestion, say, asking the mid-management and boots on the ground. If you use both, will this skew the results? Saying, for example, boots on the ground might have a strong opinion against certain questions that you have here, and mid-management may be in an opposite direction. If you put both of these groups together, would it skew the results, or is it better to do it, individual groups to get a better idea how each group feels?
It's an excellent question, and there are ways to capture with the demographics where, are you a manager, are you a field staff? There are ways to capture that information. So, but you're absolutely right. They say in my country, I eat cabbage, you eat meat. So on average, we eat stuffed cabbage. So we got to be a little bit careful with it, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's good to do two different groups, because management may think everything's great. It's pie.
Yeah.
Boots on the ground, they're out there with the customers. They're like, it's not great. It's broken.
Yeah.
So sometimes it may give you an unrealistic average if you're looking for an average, but if you're looking at them separate and you're looking at, okay, how does boots on the ground see this change? How do they see the impact to their daily work? We know how they feel. Management may be thinking of implementing the change because they're disconnected from the ground and they see it a totally different way. So what we now have to do is how to move that piano from one side to the other. We either need to get boots on the ground on board with what management sees as necessary, or we need management to adjust their expectation to meet boots on the ground. So it gives us different perspectives so that we can meet everyone where they are so that we can accomplish what it is we want to accomplish.
You know, part of it is also teaching management to listen to the boots on the ground. So if it's possible to have people together and to actually be honest about, you know, things, then that would be desirable, but it's not always possible, right? So there can be different approaches to it, but in the end, in order to implement a change from top to bottom of the organization, so to speak, you know, everyone needs to be on board. And the people team is actually beginning to deal a little bit with the issue of, you know, kind of middle management is usually the biggest obstacle. It's not necessarily because time.
Scott, and Ashley has her hand up.
Okay.
I just wanted to give, I appreciate your comments, Scott. Just wanted to make sure that
that's great.
Ashley has. Ashley.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, everyone. And I think the key things that I'm taking away from this discussion is that it's all really comes down to psychological safety and trust of each group. And so, and then also to Deborah's point that, you know, making sure if we can have the rating scale be consistent to help with our assessment and the work of the survey. But to Ramona's points, I think that how do we initialize that discussion and make sure we have that discussion and that it's open and people feel safe to answer? And is it that through the design of the survey, or is that through the facilitation of the workshop itself, or in asking those questions? So maybe it is in Mentimeter, for example, where it's anonymous and people can feel safe. And it speaks to those group separations as well, where do you have, you know, frontline staff together with upper management? I'm not going to speak up probably if they know it's my answer, but making sure that we do also have those individual versus group perspectives recorded in a anonymous way. So lots of key takeaways here. But what we put into a survey, into the tool versus how we facilitate it, I think is, and also depends on the culture of the organization probably as well.
Great comments.
Yeah, great comments for everybody. I know that people have other stuff going on. We're a little bit over time, but I will post the video, and I will also I'll just stop the recording.